Welcome back to another episode of the Brawn Body Health and Fitness Podcast. Joining me today is Dr. Ryan Murphy, or Murph. Ryan is a physical therapist down at Old Bull Athletics, and he's a strength and conditioning coach as well. Ryan and I are going to be diving into hunting, so archery, shotgun, rifle. We dive into things from a needs analysis standpoint, the different types of demands that go into hunting, and we talk about this in relation to physical therapy and strength and conditioning. So what happens when we have a patient who comes into the clinic and wants to get back to hunting? What kind of things go into that? Or, say someone's got a little bit of pain and it's preventing them from hunting. How do you go about addressing it and facilitating, optimal or safe or whatever term you want to use, return to activity? So great episode, great listen today. Really appreciate Ryan. Before we get to this episode, I just want to mention that season 5 is sponsored by ISOFIT, which is my go-to for all things isometric strength training. You can check them out in the description below. Enjoy. Ryan, welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to work with you today, man. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Dan. Appreciate it.
For people who might not be familiar with you, or maybe they're not sure about all the amazing things you're doing down in Miami there, would you mind filling them in a little bit about who you are?
Sure. So my name is Ryan Murphy. I'm a doctor of physical therapy, originally hailing from the great state of Massachusetts. Massachusetts started America, a little plug there. I went to the University of Miami for undergrad, also stayed there for grad school, graduated in 2020 with my DPT right before COVID kicked off. So just like everybody else that graduated at that time, we've been trying to navigate the new world, right? The new PT landscape. Started working at a clinic called Physical Therapy U in Bridgewater, Massachusetts at the start of my career. Worked there for 2 years and then moved back down to Miami. And now I work for Old Bull Athletics in Pinecrest.
That's awesome.
So we do physical therapy, traditional rehab. If you look at our social media, it looks like all we do is lift weights. But it's true. We do lift a lot of weight, right? And frankly, good rehab, good physical therapy looks a hell of a lot like a really well done strength training program too. So just tailored to the individual. We do a lot of wellness as well in terms of pointing people in the right direction towards nutritionists or dietitians should it be needed. Talking a lot about stress management, lifestyle modification, things along those lines. But stuff that is well within our scope as PTs, but a lot of the stuff that gets kind of pushed to the wayside when you don't get the time to really meet that individual and talk to them a lot.
Yeah, no, definitely. I love that. And as you mentioned, those lines between PT and strength and conditioning are or should be intentionally gray, right? I just think about a lot of the people I work with on the day to day, and I think they would fall asleep if I made them do 3 sets of 10 straight leg raise all day, or if I made them sit on heat for 20 to 30 minutes. I still don't understand why that's, common practice in 2024, but it is.
Yeah.
When I think about, we were talking earlier, I've got a guy who's going duck hunting today, first time out since ACL surgery. And it's like, we didn't get him to that point so quick by sitting around and not doing anything. Like, we had to push the envelope, and we had to kind of break the traditional mold a little bit to get him there. And, he's there, which is great, but that's an area in particular. I feel like a lot of PTs don't understand what goes into something like hunting, whether that's duck hunting or deer hunting, or, if you go out west, some of the different wild game that's out there, like, it's a lot more demanding than I think people think. What do you say?
I would agree with that. And I think a lot of it just has to do with the fact that if you know what it takes to go hunting, then you can understand the concept behind it. I remember in 2020, I got into archery pretty heavy. I had never really done it before, had always desired to do it. And the gun laws in Massachusetts kind of dictated that, okay, this had a lot less red tape. Let's start here. And when I started to learn about hunting, and everybody always said, like, oh, hunting is conservation and hunting is hard. And I was like, well, don't you just sit in a tree stand? And I think that's where a lot of people kind of initially think, right? They picture like an overweight dude up in the air, just like shooting down some helpless animal. That's not what it is at all. And frankly, getting up in a tree stand is no easy task, right? Depending on if you have a climber, maybe you have a ladder with a set location because you're on private land or something like that. But if you're on public lands, you're getting up and down a tree stand, either using climbing sticks or using a climbing tree stand. To get there, you got to pack it in, then you got to get up the tree, then you got to get down the tree, and then you got to pack it all out. So there's load, there's weight. It's kind of no different than going hiking for an extended period of time because you do have a load bearing capacity thing that you have to deal with, right? And then you also have to carry in your ammunition. You have to carry in whatever you're using to hunt, whether it be a bow, whether it be a rifle. So there's extra stuff happening I think a lot of people think about because they assume that you can just kind of go out your backyard and take a game animal, and that doesn't always work out that way.
Yeah, it's nice when you have like 2, 3 thousand acres that you can just, shoot out the back porch from. But as you mentioned, that is not commonplace at all. And, for those listening too, as you mentioned earlier, I think it's really important to connect with your patients and talk with them about, what they're trying to get back to and where they want to go. And you really have to understand that. Now,
Hmm.
when it comes to hunting, you mentioned archery, there's rifle, shotgun, there's a lot of different things. How would you kind of break it down or like categorize different types of hunting?
Yeah, so let's talk archery, right? Because archery
Yep.
is kind of where I got my feet wet, and that's because bow hunting in the area of Massachusetts that I grew up in is huge. So
Yep.
southeastern Massachusetts has one of the largest deer herds in the entire country, and it's because the area between 495, 93, and the Cape Cod Canal that's from a population density perspective, it's very dense, but those are the suburbs southeast of Boston, right? That environment is ideal for white-tailed deer because they have readily available, basically bedding areas, right? They can get into your backyards and the spaces in between you and your neighbors' yards, and that's fairly safe from predators. They also don't have a lot of predators in that area, aside from the eastern coyote that has started to evolve into a bigger species. And they also have a ton of food in the way of your shrubs, right? Used to drive my dad nuts. My dad used to walk around the yard with a bucket of coyote pee every spring pretty much and just douse the plants. It smelled like crap for a week, but we never had any deer. So from the archery perspective, right, you need your front arm to stabilize. You also need your rear arm to stabilize, and they're different muscle groups, right? It's a lot of posterior shoulder, it's a lot of posterior cuff, but they're two different actions, and one is more dynamic than static. There are a lot of people with shoulder discomfort that end up going to crossbow shooting because they can no longer draw a bow. And I know that some different states require that you have a letter that shows you can't draw a bow anymore. But then if you rehab it and you can draw a bow, they don't let you draw a bow because then you're officially a crossbow hunter, stuff like that. So there's some nuance to like the laws and stuff like that that you kind of have to figure out. And it's kind of up to you to know that for your patient, your client, right? Help them help themselves to a degree before they get stuck into one bucket. Um, the other thing that I'll say about archery in general too, especially as it pertains to hunting, is that you're probably more than likely going to get kind of a bird's eye vantage point when you're hunting too, right? I think a lot of the bow hunters are going to be your tree stand hunters. They're going to be dudes that are climbing up trees that are trying to, basically be a linesman in the middle of the woods. And there is a decent amount of danger with that as well, right? So you have to get up the tree, you have to stay in the tree, and make sure that you don't fall out of the tree. And there's a fair amount of accidents that happen every year where people will fall, break arms, break legs. Anything as extreme as also being paralyzed and or dying from falling out of a tree stand if done incorrectly, right? So physical preparedness can obviously mitigate that risk. Understanding the demands that that person has to go through can also mitigate that risk as a professional, because then you can help them be better prepared for the task at hand, right? But somebody who's back pain, post-op back surgery, post-op shoulder surgery, hip labrum repair, knee pain, ankle pain, right? You're not going to be able to get up a climbing stick that well, especially when you have 6-inch boots on in the middle of winter and it's icy and it's cold outside.
Right.
It's a different beast altogether. Now, can you still shoot out of a tree stand with a rifle or a shotgun? 100%. But I think that at least in the Northeast that I've seen, the vast majority of hunters, once it comes to like muzzle loading season, they're on the ground, right? Because now they can reach out and touch something much easier than they could with a bow, right? Maximum effective range of the bow is probably going to be about 50 yards, depending on the individual. I think for most people, it's even inside of that. For me, it is anyways. I'm probably around 35, 40 yards maximum effective range. But, that comes with practice. If your maximum effective range is now 100 yards and you can kind of walk into the woods and from the ground more spot and stalk as opposed to just kind of still hunt, all right, great. Now your ability to fall out of a tree has gone down, but that doesn't mean that you don't have to contend with terrain,
Right.
right? Now you have to deal with everything else around you. Now, should you be able to go for a leisurely walk in the woods without hurting yourself? Absolutely. Does that mean that you will go for a leisurely walk in the woods without hurting yourself? No. Right. I had a client of mine who was up on his land in New Hampshire. He was in a tree stand, actually, archery hunter. He had 2 deer. Put one down about 15 yards from a stand, put another one down about 25 yards from a stand. And it was so thick. He was in basically like a big thicket down by his property, and he couldn't get his game card in. So what he did is he strapped basically paracord around the antlers of the buck, and he was dragging one of the bucks out, and he blew his Achilles. Just blew his Achilles. So now and to his credit, he got both deer out of the woods on one Achilles.
That's amazing.
He's a beast. He's a beast. Former police officer. Like, he was pretty high up in the force. He's a monster. But he blew his Achilles, dragged got one deer out of the woods. Luckily, the other one was easier to get to. Got the other deer out of the woods, and then was able to get himself to the hospital and be like, I think I really hurt myself.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing.
And then from a shotgun perspective too, let's talk like duck hunting in particular. I think that's what most people would liken shotgun hunting too. I think you and I talked about it just kind of messaging on Instagram the other day. The impulse of a 12 gauge, it's intense, right? 12 gauge recoils and it bucks. Now, depending on what you're shooting, right? If you're shooting birdshot, it's not going to be as intense as buckshot. It's not going to be intense as a slug, right? But if you shoot a slug, man, slugs kick and they hit hard because there's just a lot of energy leaving that muzzle, and laws of physics, right? Every action is going to have an equal and opposite reaction. So if you figure you're firing a good sized projectile down range, it's going to kick back into your shoulder, and it's going to let you know that it just fired.
To the point on the shotgun as well, for those who don't know, there's different gauges, right? So you've got 12 gauge, 20 gauge. Essentially, the smaller the gauge number, the larger the bore of the gun is going to be. So understanding how a different size bore, a different gauge is going to impact your patient, how much kick they're going to feel, in addition to what kind of shot they're shooting, also kind of plays into it as well, I think.
Yep, definitely. And then you could even take it as far as home defense too, right? Depending on how serious people take their home defense scenarios. If you don't have the physical preparedness to be able to handle what you plan on using for home defense, I know a lot of people, Mossberg makes like a stockless shotgun for home defense. And if you can't hold on to that shotgun in order to protect yourself, your family, your home, whatever it may be, well, then it's effectively useless.
Yeah, no,
Right.
exactly. So, and you also mentioned about rifle too there. Same thing there, right? There's a difference between how someone's going to shoot a 243 versus a 308, and understanding like what caliper, what they're trying to get back to. And also understanding too, like it's not as much as just like holding and aiming a gun, but holding and aiming it precisely to the point where you don't miss, because, say you're 2 or 3 inches to the left. When you're hunting, you want a clean kill. You want the animal to drop and be done. Like, I think this is something people don't understand, or, people have never gone hunting, don't understand, is the goal is to be as humane as possible. We're not trying to make an animal suffer here. So it's not just a
Absolutely.
matter of having the physical strength to align things and hold things. It's a matter of being precise and accurate with them as well.
hmm Yeah, I think you're 100% right. Right. And that's also the argument of, okay, are we just going out there to kill stuff, or are we going out there to feed ourselves? You know? And the vast majority of hunters that you speak to are very interested in the feeding component to hunting, right? And also the conservation component to hunting. Can I preserve these wild lands to ensure that I have the ability to go hunting later in the future, right? Or so that way my grandkids also get to enjoy the same experience, right? It's not so much let's go out and shoot, go out and have this very primal experience that humans have been experiencing for thousands of years, right? If not longer, who knows? There's good evidence this goes back a couple, maybe tens of thousands too. So at the end of the day, having that to hold on to and understanding that this is a bigger experience is huge too.
Completely agree. Now, we kind of broke it down into archery, shotgun, and rifle buckets. And, you could get into different talks about like muzzle loader or black powder, but at least in my experience, I've seen that far less common than I would say those big three that we kind of mentioned so far. When it comes to archery in particular, you mentioned about crossbow, but I've even seen some guys that still like to shoot like a recurve bow instead of a compound. And at least
Yeah,
in
the
my
the
angle,
recurves are cool.
Yeah, they're really cool. But the compound is significantly easier to shoot. Sure, you still
Hmm.
have to draw it back, but you can customize the draw length, the draw weight.
Hmm.
You can customize all these different things to you. Whereas like a recurve bow, at the end of the day, it's the same size and same weight. There's not as much
Hmm.
customizability, and I think there's a huge difference just from what I've seen myself in holding back a compound. So much easier to hold it as compared to like a recurve.
Yep, and that's to your point, right? So they build in let off to those cams, right? So if your draw weight, my draw weight on my bow right now is 70 pounds, but I have an 80% let off. So I'm not holding at 80 pounds while I try to maintain stability, but I'm holding at somewhere around 12, I think, if I remember correctly. In doing that, it makes it a hell of a lot easier to actually maintain target picture, to actually hold draw while you're drawn back, so that way you can make a clean, ethical shot, so that way you can aim correctly. And it also doesn't smoke your shoulder, right? Could you
Yeah.
imagine if you had to hold 80 pounds, drawn all the way back, and just sit there and sit there and sit there? I mean, your rear cuff would be jacked. You probably wouldn't feel good after the second shot, third shot. But I don't know if you've ever seen people shoot recurve, or even the people will make out of like a big tree limb and stuff like that. But people that shoot longbows, they draw and shoot in the same breath. They draw, they hit a sticking point, and then they let go, and then it just fires. So I mean, their aiming is completely different than everything with a compound bow. I think compound bow shooters like myself. Do you shoot compound too?
Yep.
Yeah, we're spoiled because we get to aim and take our time and be patient and hold and hold and hold and hold and then let it fly. Those stick bow shooters, man, they're just boom, set it
Yep.
and go.
Yeah, no, exactly. And to that point as well, I was reading the other day about some of the background on longbows because bows have been around for thousands of years, right?
Yep,
Some of the draw weights on some of the older style traditional ones from thousands of years ago, they're proposing that the draw weight on them is 100 to 130 pounds. How
isn't that
many
crazy?
people do you know could pull 130 pounds back while stabilizing and keeping everything aligned accurately, right? Like,
At
to me,
full draw, nobody.
yeah, that's almost the equivalent. I guess if I had to relate it to the gym, like rowing a 130-pound dumbbell with one arm while holding one in front of you steady at the same time.
No, it just it almost doesn't compute. There's a one dude on Instagram that I saw who's into I'm gonna call it medieval warfare, but he's got like a 6 foot tall longbow. It's enormous, and the draw weight on it's like I think 135, 140 pounds.
That's absurd.
And the dude's back, and he practices it, like he does holds, but you're also not going to blow out the cams on a longbow because there are no cams on a longbow if you dry fire it, right? So
Right.
he practices the draw cycle, and you look at the dude's back, and it's like sculpted out of the Renaissance in Italy. Like it should be a marble bust of his back. It's huge, you know. You can see every muscle fiber, you can see every muscle group. It's impressive as hell, but that's what that practice gains you. So can you develop that ability? Sure. And then that could also just link us back into, okay, so somebody's never drawn a bow before, or they started drawing a bow and they've got pain, they've got discomfort, they want their draw weight to go up. How do you help that person?
Yeah.
Right. It's the same way that that dude with the longbow is doing it, right? It comes down to practice, repetition, and then specificity to a degree.
Yeah, and on that point too, if you're working with someone in the archery setting from a PT or strength and conditioning realm, you're not going to see symmetry between their left and right shoulder if they've been doing it for a
Hmm.
long time. Like as you mentioned before, there's a different demand on stabilizing shoulder, holding the bow up front versus the one that's pulling back. So, if you assess them and it's perfectly even, 9,500% symmetry, that could be a sign of error. Symmetry is not always a good thing in this world.
I would agree with that. And I think it's, especially in PT school, right? We're taught to look at kind of normative values in terms of range of motion and in terms of strength, and to look at symmetry side to side. But understanding the task makes a big difference there, right? A baseball pitcher is not going to have the same amount of external rotation with his throwing arm as his non-throwing arm, right? He's going to have significantly more external rotation on his throwing arm because of the task. So same idea. And if he is even side to side, well, what's he doing with his left arm? Why does he have so much rotation out of the other side? That doesn't make a ton of sense to me. But say, yeah. So one of my clients was a Pan American archery. He was on the Pan Am archery team for a number of years back when he was younger. Um, Incredibly fascinating dude too. Used to fly DC-10s into Iraq and Afghanistan during Desert Storm. Currently races for his own powerboat racing team. Like, fascinating dude. But we started talking about archery one day, and he was like, "Yeah, my right upper trap is just always higher than my left. I can't fix it. I shot competitively for years, right? And all the practice, all of the repetitions, my upper trap's just tight." And in my head, right, sometimes you get into, well, I can fix that. You got to sit there and like kind of choke on your ego and be like, "No, you're right. You're right. I can't fix that. Probably can't fix that unless you stop shooting the bow forever." But there's no desire to do that, right? Like shooting archery. I like shooting archery. My upper trap, it's probably gonna do the same thing. I can tell you what though, there's definitely a fatigable difference on my right to my left. My left side is typically the reason. So I'm right-handed. So my right side gets or doesn't get as tired as my left side. When my left kind of rear delt will just get super smoked when I'm out front and stabilizing that bow. And I very hard working on it very hard to try and stabilize that up. I just increased my draw weight, so we'll see.
Yeah, no, definitely. And as you kind of bring up there, that front hand stabilizing position is kind of a unique position. I think of most strength and conditioning programs I see for like shoulder days, and we're getting overhead press, we're getting some dumbbell raises, and maybe a couple machine work type things as accessories. We're not
Mm,
really hitting that, plane very well if I'm drawing back and firing from, say, this position here, like I'm kind of in a little bit of a weird, like, frontal plane, if you want to call it that, somewhere between scaption and frontal plane of that front shoulder. And that's
yeah,
an area that we just kind of completely skip over and miss, right? And same thing for rehab, right? 3 sets of 10 band IR ER is not going to cut it for someone in archery. It's just not the way to do it.
yep,
It's funny, a lot of times when I get someone with shoulder pain from archery, a lot of it comes back to like almost like an impingement type thing. And I know there's some, debate on if subacromial impingement is even a thing. But, I notice once we smoke scap stabilizers, cuff stabilizers, and just kind of bulletproof, for lack of a better way to put it, everything around the shoulder joint, things clear up pretty nicely. So it's one of those things too, as I know you guys talk about all the time at Old Bull, like, look beyond just the area that they're having pain. Sometimes we have to bring T-spine and scapula into the conversation and not just like, blow up the shoulder joint itself.
100%. Right, you got to look at the entire picture, look at the joints above and below, make sure that you're not missing something. I mean, because who knows? Maybe some of that discomfort could be coming from their neck. Maybe it's neck oriented,
Yeah,
right? And then they just haven't been paying attention to it. No, maybe somebody else missed it. The other thing about that front shoulder too, it's such an interesting position because it defies what you would want to train, right? You would want to get and you'd want to be nice and firm and stiff with that front hand if you were training it, but it's not, right? You're supposed to have a relaxed hand. Your grip is supposed to be right like 30 to 45 degrees. You don't want to hold the bow too tight because then you're going to torque the riser. Your elbow needs to be a little bit bent. Your shoulder needs to be a little bit protracted. It's a very fascinating position to find yourself in because I think there's a textbook way to do it, and then there's the way that you actually are able and capable to do it, right? So how do you train that, and how do you break that movement down? Do you do block task training? Do you do part task training? Do you just do whole task training, right? Do you just say, screw it, let's go ahead and do the whole thing? And it's a very interesting thing. The other thing that I will say is that the vast majority of archery patients that I've had in the past, I haven't seen them for their shoulders, which
really.
is interesting. I've seen them for everything else. I've seen two or three guys that were shoulder patients, but not as it related to archery injuries, right? They were HVAC. They did other stuff. They were overhead workers, right? And their shoulders were smoked, but they were like, I need to be good for archery season. I need to fill the freezer.
Right.
So they were there for archery, but not because archery is the thing that did it to them.
Yeah.
Or knee replacements. I had a retired police chief come in, and his only goal. This is the funniest thing. So what are your goals for physical therapy? And he was like, you want to know what my one goal is? He said, I need to be in the woods by the end of December. I've got 2 tree stands up. I currently can't climb the tree stands. I need to fill my freezer. I've got a couple of bucks on camera. I've got land behind my yard. If you can get me into a tree stand by December 31st, I will bring you whatever cut of whatever deer I get.
That's amazing.
Say less. He was in a tree stand by November 6th.
That's awesome.
Really pushed the envelope on that guy.
Yep, and you have to sometimes. Now, I'm interested to
Yep.
get your thoughts on this. We were talking earlier about, the neuro PT, and I know that's another big thing down there at Old Bull. How do you feel? I'm not good with neuro myself. How do you feel like ocular component contributes to things like archery, rifle, that sort of thing? Like, is there anything that you can do from more of like the neuro instead of the strict like sports ortho standpoint, from like a hunting performance side of things?
I don't see why not, right? Now, I don't think it's something that I've necessarily seen individually. That being said, though, right, if you talk about kind of VOR, you're right, your vestibular ocular reflex, how you can do it, you can train it times 1, you can train it times 2 once you get the head movement again. You could look at a variety of different interventions regarding the vestibular system, stuff like that, right? So if it's somebody who's dealing with something along the lines of a vestibular issue where their orientation, their equilibrium is off, absolutely, right? In terms of the ocular style of rehab, I think it depends on what we're looking at, right? Do they have something like an ocular muscle deficiency? Because if that's the case, 100%, right? That's their muscles. We learned that in school too. So as long as it's something that you can train and work on, I don't see why not. Now, as it pertains to aiming, let's say, right? I am kind of like cross-eye dominant. So I am right-handed as a shooter, right? You do the test. I always go to my right eye, but I'm a lefty. I'm left-handed. I kick with my left hand. I hit a baseball right-handed. I throw a baseball left-handed. Like it's interesting to see when I aim, I have to really set my right eye. And I've done drills, right, where you'll see people that cover their non-dominant eye with an eye patch, so that way it doesn't come into play, right? You'll see professional archers that do that, so that way they only have that one eye they're focusing on. The first time that I shot a bow, I hit the bullseye 3 lanes to my left because my left eye took over and aimed for me in comparison to my right eye, which is actually looking down the sight. And then as it pertains to like shooting through a scope too, right? Same idea. If you're kind of cross-eye dominant or partially cross-eye dominant, or your right eye is not doing the thing that it should be doing in terms of looking down that scope, getting a clear sight picture, so that way you can actually make a good, clean shot. There's definitely stuff that we can do in terms of training that. Then the question is, do you need something like a VOR training in order to get a clear sight picture? If you're not getting a clear sight picture because you have some degree of movement occurring through the eye due to muscular deficiency, yeah, sure, right? We can train that. That would be like concussion rehab to a certain degree too. It's interesting. That's a good question. I
Yeah,
haven't seen it yet clinically.
yeah, and now that we bring it up, probably in another week or two, one of us will get it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and that's one I think, you mentioned it's kind of like concussion rehab. That's an area where I think you can get so creative. I will not call myself the neuro expert by any means. There's a lot I don't know there, but I think this is an area where you can really get crafty and creative and kind of defy the rules, so to speak, a little bit. So if I got someone who comes in for that VOR type progression, yeah, sure, maybe we start basic VOR 1, VOR 2, but eventually I want to get them to a more multitask or dual task type of, progression. And, in relation to,
Mhm.
something like hunting, we have to think, okay, we have to stabilize certain muscles, but we also have to aim, and the target we're aiming might be stationary or it might be moving. So how can I kind of work in, standing on possibly uneven ground or sitting, different positions? How can I work in a
Mhm.
moving target, and how can I work in some type of our body might have to be moving and tracking, so body moving and eyes moving simultaneously into some kind of intervention that way. And I have not done this yet, but now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, one of these days this is going to happen. I might have to have someone bring like a BB gun into the clinic or something like that, and almost like set up some kind of like makeshift practice range. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting too because you just brought up a good point about how you have to be focusing on a sight picture and moving and rotating. And anybody with some degree of a vestibular issue, even a low grade vestibular issue, they might fall over from that position, right?
Mhm.
Right. Especially if you're kneeling, right? You decrease your base of support. Now all of a sudden you're way more unbalanced. I mean, how many people have you seen clinically that can't actually be on one knee
Yep.
in half kneeling? I was working on it with a client the other day. He can't maintain his balance in half kneeling. So we made him go from tall kneeling to half kneeling, tall kneeling to half kneeling. So that way he could work on getting off the ground.
Yeah.
You know, that's a kind of a life or death position for a lot of people. You either
No,
get up or you don't.
you're absolutely right. And, to that point too, like, say you get that guy, like we talked about earlier, who comes in, fell out of the tree, broke his arm coming in for PT, might not
Mhm.
hurt to check out balance and see what some of these things are like, because sure, you're rehabbing an arm, but you're also rehabbing a person. And if the injury
Yep.
was falling, we should probably look at why that happened in the first place.
Yep. 100%. Right. Look at the whole picture, not just what happened.
Exactly. And to that point too, we talked a little bit earlier about, the environment that goes into hunting. How do you go about prepping someone, clinically or strength and conditioning for, an uneven environment and, the load that you're going to have to carry or the climbing that you might have to do?
Well, it depends on the environment, right? We talked earlier a little bit about those big mountain Western hunters. Can I adequately prepare somebody for 5,000 feet of elevation change over the course of a day in Miami, Florida, where my average elevation is like 2 or 3 feet above sea level? Well, that's where you get creative, right? You do lots of
Yep.
step ups, right? Now, plate carriers, right? You can add weight, you can ruck. If somebody's going big mountain hunting, right, they've got a 3 day pack ready to go at least, right? So that way you can just fill that up. I've done, especially for myself, I have 5 or 6 different cast iron pans. I've stuffed all of them in a backpack before to increase the amount of weight. So that way when I kind of go ruck with the backpack on and make that challenging. But in terms of the environmental necessities over uneven terrain and whatnot, you can only get so creative. I will say that, right? Clinically, it's not like any of us work in a rock climbing gym. Now, I'm sure there's somebody who does, right? That could get a lot more creative than we could. But to a certain degree, you almost have to get them into the environment prepared and hope for the best, And that's where it comes down to, okay, so we're looking at the whole picture of you are going to get dropped into a river basin and you're going to have to hump it up a mountain 2 3,000 feet on day one. You're going to set up base camp, and then from there you're going to glass over 10 miles of terrain. And when you make your 600-yard shot on that elk, now you're going to have to go back down that river basin 2,000 feet elevation, back up to the other ridge that you just shot it on, take that 800-pound animal, quarter it, and then pack it back out until you get picked up in that same river basin by helicopter again. All right. Well, you better be strong. You better have some damn good endurance. And you better understand also how to fix the little aches and pains that are going to happen to you, right? So that preparation is a lot less to do, I think, with replicating the environment, which I think a lot of times, especially newer grads, try to replicate the environment too frequently, as opposed to preparing adequately for the task at hand and then allowing the environment to dictate some of the uncontrollables.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I love your point too about, fixing the little things that are going to come up, because
Mm.
most of the time when people get back from a hunting trip, they don't physically feel their best. They feel a little bit beat up and run down. And that's the kind of thing that can really make or break your trip, right? Like if things start
Mm.
hurting and you're in pain, your hunting trip is nowhere near as enjoyable as if you're feeling good. So, and on that point too, it's not like you can pack a whole clinic in, a book bag here, because you've got to carry everything. So I'm not sending guys into the woods with a Theragun. I'm not sending them into the woods with, like, the floss bands and the lacrosse balls and that sort of thing. Are they great? Yeah, but it's just extra space, extra things we have to concern ourselves with. I really like the isometric exercises here. I'm very biased towards isos, but let me tell you what, people feel pretty good afterwards. And
They
it
feel
puts
pretty
blood,
good after them. That is true.
yeah, blood flow, little tendon load, and no
Hmm.
equipment needed. I'm all here for it. So I
Yep.
really like to load up the ISOs here. I love your point too on, there's a limit to what we can do clinically. Depending on your budget, sure, you might be able to get some of these new fancy things. Like I forget what company, but someone has a treadmill now with like 20 different like belts that you can put on it with different
Mhm.
surfaces on it, which it's cool, but what clinic has 6 figures to drop on a treadmill?
I
Not
know.
not many.
And to what degree is it actually that useful?
Yeah. Where's the specificity here? So, instead, I like to try and set up different demands in the clinic. So, if it's uneven surface, like, can we go from a flat ground to a slant board where, we might be moving the foot into more pronation or supination to, maybe like, I've set up like plates before where there's a little space in between them. So like,
Mhm.
one foot is elevated and the other's on the ground, or like you can vary the conditions and environment in the clinic very easily and get creative with it.
Yeah.
And on the vertical point of, not being in a climbing gym, I think pull-up strength is extremely underrated, the ability to pull your own weight, but get a little more crafty with it and vary the grip, right? If you're on a budget, literally take your lifting straps out of your gym bag, wrap them around the pull-up bar, and then like you're
Dang.
holding on to the strap part, your grip lights up almost immediately. I really like some of the different little like attachments for that too. I literally took two baseballs, drilled a hole in them, put an eye bolt through it, and wrapped a chain around it. And now I've got a baseball grip for pull-ups, chin-ups, whatever you want to call it that way, for like
Nice.
15
That's
bucks.
awesome.
So it's like you can get creative and crafty here. I love your point on the rucking. I also really like the loaded carry here, just straight farmer's carry. There's something to be said about
Yep.
like chop wood, carry water at the end of the day.
Yep.
I think some people on Instagram take it a little too far in that, they'll only load, like, I think offset training is good, but I also think there's a point of diminishing returns with how long it takes you to set things up. And while, stuff that a certain individual on Instagram might develop looks cool, it might take you 15 minutes to set up. And it's like, what's the point of that if we're missing out on, quarter of our training session just to
Mhm.
set something up. So love the loaded carry, love the sled here, love the ISOs. This is really an area where, as you mentioned, it's more of like a tactical athlete kind of thing. Like you're trying to develop like brute strength and force with the endurance to last a long period of time across a variety of conditions instead of just develop one specific thing like, change of direction or something like that.
Yeah. To your point, right? Hunting looks a lot like military training. It does. Right. So if you've ever worked with anybody who's in the military, I've been lucky enough to work with a number of fire and police professionals, in addition to quite a few retired military personnel, as I'm sure you've had in Maryland as well, right?
Hmm.
They're beasts. They
Yes.
are very capable and strong individuals, and they require a certain degree of pushing in order to actually get better because they're already so strong and capable.
Yep.
Um, it is no easy task to get somebody ready for the woods, for that big hunt, right? But some people have waited years to get a tag out in Colorado, out in Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, and they're paying, upwards of tens of thousands of dollars to get brought in to these remote camps so that way they have the shot at a once in a lifetime animal that they can take home, feed their family for probably a year plus, right? An elk will feed a family of four for at least a year, but you also want that trophy up on the wall. You
Yep.
know, it's got to look cool. Get your Euro mount up there. Get your full Cape mount up there. So to be able to help somebody get that once in a lifetime experience in, it's incredibly rewarding. To be able to, and even just say it's not a once in a lifetime experience. Say it's the person that has a family farm that they go hunting on every year and they haven't been able to do it because they got back pain or because they got something else. Giving that person their lifestyle back, right? Getting them back to what makes them who they are.
Yeah.
That joy, that fun factor. And even people that don't hunt, right? People that just enjoy being outside, hiking, etc. Right? There's something to be said for being able to go outside and just enjoy it,
Yep.
you know? Because and frankly, it makes people happier, right? There's all sorts of research to show that being out of doors makes you happier, improves your mood. I believe it also decreases cortisol levels in certain studies. Like there's a lot of evidence to show that getting people outside makes a hell of a difference in terms of how they can interact with you and the outside world and internally for them and personally as well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And, on that point, you're heading outside this weekend for a little bit. How are you
Yep.
preparing to head out? What are you going to be doing this weekend? What kind of things are you looking forward to, Ryan?
So, like Dan just said, I'm going duck hunting in it's still South Florida by definition, but I'm going duck hunting in Immokalee, Florida, which is a little bit kind of southwest of Lake Okeechobee. The first time I went duck hunting down here, I was in 10,000 Island National Wildlife Refuge, and just like it sounds, there are 10,000 little mangrove islands, and you are just in about a foot to 3 feet of brackish water in a kayak, hanging out, waiting for ducks to come on through. You got your decoy spread, you're good to go. Truthfully, I have no idea what I'm walking into tomorrow. I know that I have to take an ATV to get there. I know that there's going to be some pretty tall sawgrass that we're going to be pushing through. So we're going to find out.
Yeah,
We're going
yeah,
to find out. Now, that's the unknown, right?
yep.
Am I prepared for the unknown? I hope so. I trained for it. I trained to get beat up and bruised and come back swinging. So we'll find out. But as far as the other prep work, I have to get my bag together tonight. I have to go get my waders out of storage. So, equipment checklist. But this is the stuff that everybody thinks of, right? Oh, yeah, you just need your equipment, right? You got your ammunition, you got your shotgun, you got your waders. Well, I need to make sure that my waders aren't punctured, right? I don't want to get soaked tomorrow. It's going to be 40 degrees down here in Miami, which is, nothing for any of you out there that are listening from somewhere where it's 5. But down here, that's cold. And then I went through and cleaned my shotgun yesterday. It's cycling nicely, nice and smooth right now. There was some gunk in it from the last time that I went shooting. And then I got to get my pack ready to go, get my weight distribution right, make sure that it's not going to hinder me in my performance.
A lot of prep work, and as you mentioned, the physical, unknown, and on that point too, just being ready for anything, because we didn't talk about it, but sometimes when you're hunting, things go wrong. Maybe especially down in South Florida, we don't have anything like a gator up here. But I'd imagine you've run into them once or twice, and
Um, yeah,
and
yeah. The
that might change how
it,
your trip goes.
it may. The nice thing is that you are armed while you're
Yes.
hunting. The question is, do you have your arms at the ready? But yeah, no. The joke about Florida is that everything that you are trying to beat out to that game is also trying to kill you too. You know, the python problem in the Everglades has become enormous over the last kind of 5 to 10 years because people started to leave take their pets that were getting too big for their fish tank to throw them out into the Everglades. And the Everglades is probably one of the most bountiful natural wildlife areas in the entire world. So yeah, when you throw something out there with no natural predators, it's going to go ahead and it's going to become a rampant problem. The alligators are actually endemic to the area, so they're native to the Florida Panhandle, as are some of the saltwater crocodile species that are in the area. But recently, they've found Nile crocodiles, which are a lot bigger and a lot more aggressive in the Florida Panhandle. So that's brutal. But we'll see. I think I'm far enough inland to where I don't have to contend with any crocs, but we'll definitely see some alligators without a doubt. I do know that on this property we're heading to, there's a big alligator that breeds there every year. So we'll see.
Yeah, yeah, and that can be applied to pretty much anywhere you go hunting. There's some kind of predator there. Like if you go out west, if you go up north, like up north we kind of see more like the black bear type of thing. At least in PA we did. So, just
Yep.
understanding that there's always that, fear of the unknown. And, to your point earlier, that's something that we can't always really work into rehab. But what I've tried to do, and I've only had to do this once or twice, but try and mimic the like stressed state of the body in rehab. Like get
Hmm.
someone going a little bit and get them into like that high cortisol state. and then see how they do from a performance standpoint, right?
Yeah.
Because if they can perform well, and maybe this just kind of happens accidentally one day, right? You get someone who comes in, they didn't sleep well, they're on 4 hours of sleep, they're 5 cups of coffee deep, and now you got them for PT. Like that's a perfect time for you to test the waters of how is someone going to respond in a like suboptimal physiological state, because that can be the difference between life and death sometimes.
Absolutely. Burpees suck, but burpees are a great way to get your heart rate up, and they're a
Yep.
great way to stress your entire body. If you do a bunch of burpees, do 15 burpees. Don't do 5 burpees, and then try to draw your bow or try to aim your rifle. Not going to go the way that you thought it was going to, right?
Yep.
But there's like you said, you're getting somebody out of their comfort zone physiologically, and then even emotionally in some cases too, and then have them perform. It's a big one for sure. I did some of that training. The cold shot too is something that I wanted to bring up as well. Cold shot training, it's harder to replicate in the clinic because it's not like you're going to have somebody bring their rifle or bring their bow in and just start firing arrows and rounds down range. But the ability to perform without preparation is also something that I think is big as it pertains to hunting, because a lot of times that first shot may be your only shot and you got to make it count.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. That's something that we actually I talked about this a while ago with a buddy of mine. That used to be his like training regimen is in the morning. He was lucky enough to have a little land and have a target outside. He would wake up and shoot one shot in the morning every day.
Yep.
So, maybe that's the only training he gets in that day. Maybe he gets other training in, but if nothing else, practice that one shot. And for him, he liked doing it in the morning because still a little groggy, day hasn't really started. Just get up, get it done, and go from there. Obviously, if you're in an apartment right now, like you or I, they probably won't appreciate you just stepping outside and shooting a bow. But, if you're fortunate enough to find yourself in that situation, it's certainly a cool little add-in you can add for your training.
Yeah, I used to do that myself. This is back when I moved home to my mom's place. I had a target set up on one end of the basement, and then I had my bow hanging up on a nail on the other side of the basement. It was about 15 yards away. Every morning, I used to wake up at 4:30, and by like 4:45, I had my one shot done out of the way.
Yep.
Right, and then you just look at it. Leave the arrow there, so that way you can think about it.
Yep.
Right, because that's also part of it too. Then it becomes a mental repetition game. So
No,
you can do as many physical reps as you want, but if your mental reps aren't as quality as your physical reps, there's going to be a disconnect.
absolutely. And, as we've been talking about this today here, Ryan, the other thing I really want to bring home for people listening, whether you're a PT, strength coach, trainer, chiro, whatever, if this is something your patients are interested in, take interest in it yourself. Like learn about the sport, learn what goes into it, and learn a
Hmm.
little bit about the lingo, right? Like if you're talking archery, like it's not just as simple as like go and buy a bow and go and buy some arrows. Like, there's a lot of different types of bows, like we talked about. There's a lot of different, brands out there, and some people are very biased towards certain ones. But it's not enough to just pick a good bow. Like the arrow has to match the bow. You can't just go and buy
Yep.
any arrow. You have to buy certain length arrows depending on what you're shooting. The weight of the tip of the arrow has been something I have struggled with myself immensely. I've shot 100 grains for a long time, and I really need to go to like a 125. So
Mm,
understanding the different types of tips, right? Like, you might have someone bring a bow to the clinic and they got field points, but they're going to be shooting broadheads out in the field, right? So
yeah.
understanding some of the different lingo, I think this is really commonly done in most sports, right? Like most people can tell a little bit about soccer or football or baseball because they grew up watching it, or their son plays it, their daughter plays it, whatever that way. But when it comes to hunting, this is an area where I feel like a lot of people are fairly green in, and it's something that if you learn a little bit about it, it goes a long way for your patients.
Vastly, I would agree with that. That was especially when I first got into archery, I would just ask my clients, explain this to me. I don't understand this concept. I said, I've already taken the dive, right? I'm ready to dive in on it further. But I got to tell you, man, one of the best things that you can do, like you said, is take an interest in it and try to learn more about it. The internet has so much information available to it. You know what I mean? Like we are so incredibly lucky to live in the age of refined Google, I'm going to call it, right? Because you can Google what are broadheads? And you're going to get a great answer. What's the difference between broadheads and field points? You're going to get an even better answer, right?
Yep.
And then from there, how do you draw a bow? What muscles? I mean, if you look on Instagram, there are so many good Instagram pages specific to archery, specific to rifle shooting, 3-gun competitions. Like, there's just a lot that people are super interested in and willing to share their knowledge. And all you have to do is ask the question a lot of times. Hey, man, I'm new to this. I don't understand this. Here's why I'm looking into it. Can you help me learn more about this?
Mm-hmm.
And that was the other thing that I did too, is I just went to my local archery pro shop. I probably went to the pro shop half a dozen times before I bought my bow. And I would just sit there at the countertop and I'd be like, hey man, can you explain this to me real quick? Like, what do these cables do? What draw weight should I be shooting? Can you hunt with this? Like what do you do? And I would sit there for an hour or two and they would just sit down and talk to me about it. A lot of the people that are in this industry, and that, well, I should say in the outdoor space, the outdoor industry, not so much the physical therapy industry as it pertains to the outdoor industry. But they're very willing to share their knowledge because it's a cool thing. It's fun to get outside. It is fun to take part in some of these shooting sports. And they want to get more people involved so that way more people understand that it's an okay thing to be interested in this. I think a lot of times people don't talk about the shooting sports because they're almost viewed as taboo in parts of the country.
Mm-hmm.
But done safely, done correctly, done for the right reasons, there's nothing different than that in football.
No, you're absolutely right. And to your point on earlier, there's a conservation effect. There's certainly a effect of being able to fill a freezer for, I would say a very long time, depending on what you're shooting. I'll also say, shameless plug, I love the taste of elk meat. I love the taste of a deer burger or deer jerky. It's
Yep.
really, really good. And I'm sorry, but the stuff I buy at the grocery store doesn't quite compare to it. So
No, man. And it's funny too, because time is a flat circle. So we're getting back to the whole organic, grass-fed, free-range meat, right? Well, the reason I wanted to get into hunting is because I wanted to reconnect to my food.
yep.
Simple as that. I wanted to have that kind of understanding, that knowledge base. What does it take to harvest an animal? Right? That when I went duck hunting, we were unlucky in the sense that we only got one duck. That was my first ever harvest of a game animal.
Yep.
That was the best duck I could have ever imagined, right? It was a blue-winged teal. It was a hen blue-winged teal. And man, I took such good care of that bird. I got all the meat off of it that I could. I vacuum sealed it, and I ended up making it the next day. It was delicious. You know what I mean? There's something to be said for going out there and harvesting food that you're going to feed to yourself, that you're going to feed to your family. It At the end of the day, it's no different than tending to a vegetable garden. It really isn't.
Yep.
It's just that you have to be kind of mentally equipped and prepared to take that shot and understand the ramifications of that action.
To that point too, if you really want to learn more, look up how to field dress a deer, because it's amazing how many people,
Steve Ranella's got a great video on that.
yeah, definitely. We might even link to that in the description below, actually. So look up something like that. And, if you're a PT out there, you did cadaver anatomy. It's not that different, really.
No, man, it really is not. It really is not. That was the funny thing about the duck. It just looked so familiar. I was like, I've done this before. And people kept asking me, like, are you going to be able to field dress it yourself? And I was like, we had 18 cadavers that we were responsible for in anatomy lab.
Yeah.
I had the respect and the ability to understand what that meant then. I would hope that I have the respect and the ability to understand that now,
Yep.
but I guess we'll find out, right?
Yeah.
That's a bit more of that unknown. Can I do it? Am
Yeah.
I mentally equipped to do it?
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's not one we can practice in the clinic, though.
Nope, you got to get out there and do it. But that's the fun part. The fun part's getting out there and doing it.
Ryan, I feel like we covered a lot of ground today and really set the stage. But like we mentioned, there's so much more we could talk about, and hopefully we'll talk about after you get back from your upcoming hunting trip there. Any closing thoughts or closing remarks or anything that we missed today?
No, we did. We covered a lot. The one thing I will say is that with any luck tomorrow, I am going to be able to shoot my shotgun a dozen plus, if not a couple dozen times. I'm expecting the cold weather across the country is going to force the duck migration further south. And given the fact that we are the warmest place in the entire United States right now, I'm hoping that Atlantic Flyway opens up tomorrow.
Yeah,
So
no,
we'll
for
see.
sure.
I'll let you guys know how my shoulder feels the next time Dan and I reconnect.
Sounds great. Ryan, for people who want to find out more about you or check you out on Instagram, that sort of thing, where can they find you at?
So I'm available on Instagram at Dr. Murph DPT. You can also reach me via email, which is also linked to my Instagram. It's murph@oldbullathletics.com. So I'm pretty accessible. Shoot me a message. If I can get to it, I'll get to it. If I don't, I'll get to it eventually.
Yeah, sounds great. We'll link to that in the description below too, so that way if you missed it, you can reach out there. And I mean, obviously, you guys do the PT and strength and conditioning and all that too. So I'd imagine if people want to get connected in that sense, they can just reach out to you and you can take it from there.
Yep. I mean, our website has our phone numbers available for both clinics. They actually go to the same person. They go to Jasmine, who is our director of operations at the clinic. She'll be able to either schedule you an appointment, connect you with a PT, or you can reach out to us directly, right? It's not uncommon for people to shoot us a text via WhatsApp or something like that, or on Instagram. So we're definitely accessible, and that's part of the reason we want to be accessible. We want to help people.
For sure, for sure. Ryan, it was a real pleasure talking with you today. Thanks, man.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it.
Welcome back to another episode of the Brawn Body Health and Fitness Podcast. Joining me today is Dr. Ryan Murphy, or Murph. Ryan is a physical therapist down at Old Bull Athletics, and he's a strength and conditioning coach as well. Ryan and I are going to be diving into hunting, so archery, shotgun, rifle. We dive into things from a needs analysis standpoint, the different types of demands that go into hunting, and we talk about this in relation to physical therapy and strength and conditioning. So what happens when we have a patient who comes into the clinic and wants to get back to hunting? What kind of things go into that? Or, say someone's got a little bit of pain and it's preventing them from hunting. How do you go about addressing it and facilitating, optimal or safe or whatever term you want to use, return to activity? So great episode, great listen today. Really appreciate Ryan. Before we get to this episode, I just want to mention that season 5 is sponsored by ISOFIT, which is my go-to for all things isometric strength training. You can check them out in the description below. Enjoy.